They came by sea and by land. They left death and destruction in their wake and shattered great kingdoms on their path before being crushed and leaving us with a massive archaeological headache. For almost 2 centuries, the Sea People have been seen as the major reason for the Bronze Age collapse, as ruthless aggressors hell-bent on conquest and raiding. But is this the truth? Thanks to modern research, we have a much more complex picture about them, and we're able to separate fact from fiction in some cases. And that's exactly what we're gonna do in this new series focused on the Sea People and the collapse of the Bronze Age, and we're gonna answer a lot of questions such as, where did they come from? Where did they go? What was their true role in the collapse, and what legacy did they leave behind, as well as the military equipment used? But before the curtain falls on the late Bronze Age, first, we have to set the stage. The world had never before seen such a time of prosperity. For centuries, the Mediterranean and the lands beyond were connected in a complex web of trade. Tin from Britain would find its way to Spain and Sardinia, and from there, it would be shipped to ports all across the eastern Mediterranean. Mainland Greece, Crete, the many islands of the Aegean, all with their own exports. Cyprus exported its world-famous copper. The Phoenician cities sold the finest wine and cedar wood, and not to mention the color purple. Pottery, Egyptian grain, Minoan jewelry, Arabian spice, anything you want, for a price. Italian smiths exported their swords across Europe. Knowledge and technology spread like wildfire. Frequent letters were exchanged between the great rulers of the time and their vassals. Diplomatic treaties, gifts, intrigue, fake gifts, and assassination, followed by war and plague. I'm sensing a deja vu for all of human history right here. A massive epidemic of tularemia broke out and affected most of the Fertile Crescent, although Syria and Anatolia suffered the most. Shuppiluliuma I, one of the greatest kings to have lived of the Hittites, succumbed to it, as well as his successor Arnuanda II. Just as men die, so do kingdoms, and the power of the Mitanni faded, while Assyria was on the rise. Piracy sees an increase in the eastern Mediterranean, and the new, strange mercenaries called the Shardana appear in Canaan. Violence and prosperity, the constants of human history. Yet no matter the hardship, life went on and the trade across the known world would continue. After all, what could possibly shatter it? Seismic activity was steadily increasing across the eastern Mediterranean. At the turn of the century, earthquakes caused massive destructions in Troy. Eventually, other regions would follow. Mycenaean Greece sees many important cities such as Mycenae and Tiryns being struck by earthquakes. Just around the same time, massive walls were built around many important cities. These walls and the infamous Lion's Gate of Mycenae were made with such huge stones that it was thought that only giants, such as a Cyclops, could lift them. Further across the sea, multiple sites in the Levant show evidence of destruction. As an example, Enkomi, an important city in Cyprus, and Ugarit, one of the biggest trade hubs of the world, were also struck by earthquakes. It's not the end of the world though, most cities show signs of rebuilding, and alone, earthquakes usually wouldn't be able to cause a massive civilization collapse, but you know that overused saying, how misery loves company? Yeah, things are about to get a lot worse. The climate was getting increasingly unstable, until it culminated in a series of droughts that affected the entirety of the eastern Mediterranean towards the end of the 13th century BC. What was once suitable farmland soon became semi-arid. Crop failure resulted in widespread famines, death, and migrations. Some regions recovered relatively quickly, such as southern Canaan. Mainland Greece and the Aegean saw the start of a gradual population shift. Other areas like Syria or Anatolia were hit much worse. The Hittite situation was particularly dire. We have Egyptian and Ugaritic sources which tell us of massive shipments of grain to the land of Hatti. Even the pharaoh Merneptah states that he sent shipments of grain to keep alive the land of Hatti. It's pretty dramatic, but let's be honest, it was a situation of life or death. Rebellions and an earlier humiliating defeat at the hands of the Assyrians at the Battle of Nihria didn't exactly help the Hittite situation. The energetic king Shupiluluma II secured new trade deals and shipments of food and was able to assert some sort of dominion over Alasya by winning the first recorded naval battle in history. Another land battle followed shortly after. Even though the situation looked grim, he managed to prevent the collapse of the Hittites. At least for now. Speaking of disasters, the Middle Assyrian Empire just had their king Tukulti-Ninurta assassinated, and to make things worse, they also had a famine followed by mostly incompetent rulers. Despite all the natural disasters and warfare going on during this time, trade was alive as ever, as the many different lands were already heavily dependent on each other for a multitude of resources besides food, such as tin and copper for the production of bronze. Prosperity means piracy, and desperation means migration. During the 5th year of Merneptah's rule, a confederation of Libyan tribes led by Meryei, king of the Meshwesh, made their move towards the western delta with the intention to settle. The various tribes of Libya have been pressuring Egypt's border for centuries. This time, they weren't alone. The Libyans worked together with the warriors from the countries of the sea. Some were already familiar to the Egyptians, such as the Shardana, which served as mercenaries in Canaan and in the armies of Ramses II. While this entire chain of events and their future consequence will have a video of its own, let's focus on this new enemy. The wretched, fallen chief of Libya has fallen upon the country of Tehenu with his bowmen, Shardana, Shekelesh, Ekwesh, Luka, Teresh, taking the best of every warrior and every man of war of his country. This alliance made its way to the borders of the western delta. The Egyptian army met them at Perire. While the full details of the battles are unknown, what we do know is that the Egyptian archers rained hell on their enemies for 6 hours before the pharaoh ordered a chariot charge which broke the already decimated ranks. The Egyptians captured many prisoners, out of which some were taken into forced military service such as the Sherden, which went on to campaign in Libya and Canaan. Another report, dated around the same time or slightly later, mentions another attack by seafaring raiders on Ugarit. My father, now the ships of the enemy have come. They have been setting fire to my cities and have done harm to the land. Doesn't my father know that all my infantry and chariotry are stationed in Khatte, and that all my ships are stationed in the land of Luka? They have not arrived back yet, so the land is thus prostrate. May my father be aware of this matter. Now the 7 ships of the enemy which have been coming have done harm to us. Now if other ships of the enemy turn up, send me a report somehow, so that I will know. Raiders and invaders were nothing new to Egypt and the other powers of the Eastern Mediterranean. Neither was famine. The different kingdoms and city-states had gone through similar disasters before, and for the most part they managed to survive. Why would it be any different this time? The world was in chaos. The earthquake storms have stopped for the most part, but famine still gripped the Eastern Mediterranean and choked the life out of many villages and even some major cities. A mass movement of different tribes from all sides of the known world occurred. Some were in pursuit of plunder, and some were desperate for a new home. It wasn't just the so-called Sea People, a multitude of different tribes whose origin will be explored in the next video in the series. Different Semitic people, such as the Arameans, were also on the move. Libyan pressure on Egypt increased. Trade was affected by all these incidents and raids, both from foreign and native enemies. The world was consumed by fire. The palatial system of Mycenaean Greece collapsed. The disruption of international trade, combined with pressure from famine and internal unrest, potentially backed up by mercenaries and hostile raids, would shatter the system. It's unclear what happened to the ruling elite. Some would try to blend into the population, some would be against any potential change of status, and because of that, they would either be killed or leave to find other colonies, of which we do have evidence. Archaeology shows no signs of migrations into Greece or massive foreign invasions. In the previous century, Mycenae suffered damage from an earthquake. This time it shows signs of destruction by fire, but it's unknown what, or better said who, caused it. Mycenae itself was heavily damaged, but no evidence points toward an invasion of any kind. The most likely cause was due to internal reasons or another earthquake. It was not abandoned, just like most of the Greek cities of the time that suffered destruction. It just slowly declined over time as the palatial system shattered. Parts of it were rebuilt and reoccupied, but it would never reach its golden age again. Many other important cities show destruction, some by natural causes and some by violence. Tiryns was shattered by an earthquake, but it was rebuilt. At Midea, there are many arrows in the destruction layers. It could suggest that the citadel was besieged before its destruction. Pylos was completely devastated by fire, and it wasn't reoccupied until centuries later. Was it an internal issue, a natural disaster, or foreign assault? Linear B tablets at the site mentioned preparations to be taken, and Watchers of the Sea being posted to guard. Now ask yourself, what were they guarding against? Crete had also previously seen the disruption of trade and destruction of many sites. From this island and the rest of the Aegean and mainland Greece, alongside some central Mediterranean and coastal Anatolian elements, many tribes, led by the Peleset, started moving towards western Anatolia and beyond. The Medinet Habu inscriptions of Ramses III mention the warpath of these groups, and we'll take a closer look at all the regions mentioned. The foreign countries made a conspiracy in their islands. All at once the lands were removed and scattered in the fray. No land could stand before their arms, from Khatte, Kode, Karchemish, Arzava, and Alasha being cut off one at a time. A camp was set up in one place in Amuru. They desolated its people, and its land was like that which has never come into being. They were coming forward towards Egypt while the flame was prepared before them. Their confederation was the Peleset, Cheker, Shekelish, Danuna, and Weshesh, lands united. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth, their hearts confident and trusting. The renowned city of Troy has been destroyed. Many different theories surround its fall, with one involving the Sea People. The Hittite Empire has fallen, with the fate of its last great king, Shuppiluliuma II, unknown. Raids, rebellions, and starvation were the final blow to any political unity the Hittites might have had. The Phrygians, or Briges, moved from the Balkans into western Anatolia and filled a vacuum of power with their eventual capital at Gordion. The raids of the Kashkians, the ancient enemy of the Hittites, intensified. Hattusha was abandoned, looted, and burned to the ground, with the Kashka being responsible for its ultimate destruction. Most cities have just simply been abandoned, very few show signs of destruction. Karchemish recovered from the fall and wielded political power, and so did the many cities that would eventually be known as the Neo-Hittites in southeastern Anatolia and Syria. Kizuwadna had suffered destruction at the hands of the Sea People. Many sites, such as Tarsus, show destruction by warfare, and some Cypriot and late Helladic Free Sea pottery has been found. The pottery is easily explained by trade, although some of it was also locally produced or brought by the Sea People. This doesn't mean that the raiders stuck around for long, as soon after, most of the production continues in a distinct local style that replaced the previous Hittite imperial style. When it comes to the Assyrians, right now, they were in a period of decline thanks to a succession of many weak rulers and issues on the Babylonian front. Cyprus was one of the major trading hubs of the world, and one of its main exports was copper, necessary for the production of bronze. There were many economically important centers on the island, such as Kition in the south, and Komi in the east, and Paleopaphos in the west. It's long been believed that the Aegean islanders aggressively invaded, colonized, and destroyed most of Cyprus, but new archaeological finds challenge this view. A steady influx of Aegean migrants brought with them their own culture, which mixed with the local Cypriots and Levantine culture. Was there warfare on the island? Absolutely. Paleocastro was built from scratch just around 1200 BC on a very convenient position in western Cyprus. It wasn't built just as a fortification, it also seems to have been used for storing different trade goods and overseeing trade on the western side of the island. It was destroyed, shortly after rebuilt, and then just abandoned. In Komi, one of the largest trading hubs was destroyed as well. Now the question is how many of the raiders were newcomers who just used Cyprus as a pit stop and moved on, and how many of them were the original settlers who brought the Greek language to Cyprus. Megalithic walls were built, the city was restored, but it was abandoned during the 12th century as the harbor silted up. Another important site on Cyprus, Hala Sultan Teke, shows signs of violent destruction around 1200 BC, a partial rebuilding phase, and the final destruction around the middle of the 12th century BC. Climate change also played a part in its final abandonment besides the destruction, as it seems the natural harbor silted up, just like it in Komi. Many arrows and spearheads were found, and over 114 sling bullets. If that's not a sign of warfare, I don't know what is. No evidence so far on the island links any destruction with the invasions of the Hittites in the previous century. Many big cities such as Alasha, Kalavassos, and Maroni were abandoned without any signs of warfare. Their population migrated towards the western side of the island, to Paleopaphos, which would become the dominant trading city. Despite the abandonment of most urban centers on the island, the western part flourished and Cyprus as a whole managed to prosper even when others were crumbling down. Ugarit, one of the biggest trading hubs of the world, had been completely destroyed by the invaders. Yet somehow, trade was still being conducted until the violent destruction of the city. Many bronze objects were found in wall cavities or holes in the ground, and that means the citizens were expecting an attack, and they would return shortly after, hopefully. But, unfortunately for them, Ugarit was not reoccupied until approximately 6 centuries after its violent destruction. Many nearby sites were destroyed, such as Tel Tveni, but they also show a reoccupation after the destruction. What's interesting for this particular settlement are the remains of Aegean architecture, locally produced pottery, and other artifacts. It's a definite sign of Sea People's settlement. Now the question is, how long did it last? The city of Emar, another important trading center, was ravaged by famine, just like most of inland Syria around the time of its destruction. Yet business continued as normal until it was violently destroyed. A letter sent to Ugarit mentions the situation. "There is a famine in our house. We will all die of hunger. If you do not quickly arrive here, we ourselves will die of hunger. You will not see a living soul from your land." Shortly after, the city was destroyed. By who? I'll leave you to guess. Surprisingly, the Phoenician cities show little, if any, signs of destruction. Scholars still don't have a clear reason why. Maybe they paid the Ravagers off, or maybe there just hasn't been enough effort or interest with the dig sites. Further along the coast, towards South Canaan, we hear of many settlements being abandoned or destroyed around this time frame. But what's the actual truth? Akko shows a destruction layer in which the royal seal of the last pharaoh of the 19th dynasty, Tausret, was found. Bet Shean also shows a violent end of the Egyptians. Different destruction dates have been given for Megiddo, some more in line with the initial Sea People movement, and some dated between 1150 and 1130 BC. An ivory pen case with the symbols of Ramses III was found in the destruction layer, and that further supports this time frame. Hazor has been destroyed, with the statues of its god defaced, both Egyptian and Canaanite. Some blame the Sea People, some blame the Israelites. Potentially a third force did it. We'll need more evidence to know. Afek shows clear signs of human destruction. The Egyptian governor's palace was completely destroyed, and many valuables were found, which indicates most of the population didn't escape before the attack and was possibly killed. The site was reoccupied by the Canaanites, and later on, a peaceful integration happened with the Philistine newcomers. Lachish has been the place for debate between many scholars. Some would say the city wasn't properly destroyed and it was the result of an internal issue or accidental fire. Some will argue that Lachish was destroyed in warfare, as the new temple built for the Canaanites seems to have been pillaged and looted before it was destroyed. That does indicate human involvement, but we're gonna need more evidence before we're sure. Ashkelon, Tel Haror, Tel Sipor, and Tel Zeror only show minor fire damage, and that makes it hard to believe that it affected most or all of the city. Timna was considered to be destroyed, but recent evidence shows that no actual destruction took place, and this should be removed from the list of the cities destroyed by the Sea People. It's still often assumed that all the events depicted at Medinet Habu must have been in quick succession, and similar events fall under the Atlantis premise. No, this doesn't mean the sea people came from Atlantis. It just simply means that destructive events related to big changes or disappearances of advanced civilizations, just like the mythical city of Atlantis, have to be put in a relatively short time span. Because of that, any immediate reoccupation of the cities is easily overlooked or mistaken as evidence. For most of the cities destroyed, we need more archaeological evidence before we can say reliably that the sea people did it. It's as much of a chance that certain cities would have been ransacked by the local Canaanites or opportunistic nomads, and in some cases there's a gap of up to 50 years before any Aegean-style artifacts appear. It would seem that the sea people defeated any army assembled before them. Perhaps they were as coordinated as wolves, or perhaps they were just vultures circling around the dying kingdoms and city-states. Either way, they would regret facing the Lion of Egypt. As Ramses made proclamations to the officials and leaders of the land, the infantry, the chariotry, the sherden and many bowmen, and all the souls of Egypt, he prepared for war with the invaders. Modern scholars are mostly under the agreement that the sea people came in multiple waves, and the battles of Jai and the Delta represented at Medinet Habu and mentioned in the Harris Papyrus show a condensed version of the events. Some say it represents a simultaneous battle that happened both in land and sea nearby. Some argue that it depicts one extended battle fought at both land and sea, and others stick to the traditional narrative that it was two separate decisive battles. And we're gonna look at the traditional view. The Egyptian army marched towards Jai, located somewhere in Canaan. Some scholars have suggested the plain of Akkar as the battle location, which would also explain why most of the central Levant was spared destruction. The Egyptian army, with the assistance of their Sherden shock troops, defeated the sea people. As Ramses states, "The Egyptian charioteers were warriors, and all good officers ready of hand. Their horses were quivering in their every limb, ready to crush the foreign countries under their feet. Those who reached my boundary, their seat is not. Their heart and soul are finished forever and ever." After this victory, the Egyptian army marched back home as an enemy fleet was heading towards the delta. Ramses baited a sea people fleet into pursuing the Egyptians into the mouth of the Nile, where an Egyptian fleet was ready to ambush. Not only that, but the coast was full of archers who would rain death on the sea people. Once they were in range, the pharaoh ordered the archers to open fire on the enemy's ships. While the tribes tried to disengage, the Egyptian fleet appeared and blocked off their escape route. The Egyptian ships pushed the sea people towards the shore, where they were massacred by arrow, spear, axe, and the deadly sherden in Egyptian service. Following the great victory, the major incursions of the sea people had been stopped. Many prisoners from all the tribes were taken by Ramses and settled in military garrisons in southern Canaan and in Egypt. I guess some of them truly found the home they were looking for, one way or another. Despite the loss of manpower and financial burden Egypt suffered due to the invasions, it still held nominal dominion over Canaan. Ramses III would campaign against the Libyans, backed up by his sea people recruits, and even as far as Syria. After his death and the ascension of Ramses IV, Egypt's grip over Canaan gradually weakened. Egypt would never again reach the heights of power it enjoyed during the New Kingdom. This allowed the freshly settled Peliset, Cheker, some Shekelesh and Sherden in southern Canaan a breakaway from Egyptian dominion. More and more settlers arrived, bringing with them native Aegean forms of pottery and for the most part peacefully coexisting and integrating with the local Canaanites. This would lead to the eventual formation of the Philistines and the rise in prominence of the infamous cities of the Pentapolis, consisting of Gaza, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Ekron, and Gat. We have no concrete evidence, but perhaps other groups of sea people found their way further across the sea, towards the islands of the central Mediterranean. Despite all the death and devastation caused by wars, disease, earthquakes, and famine, the eventual breakdown of the trade was what proved to be equally deadly, if not more, for the Bronze Age. The multitudes of kingdoms and city-states were too dependent on each other as we've previously seen, and with the destruction and abandonment of some important trade hubs as well as piracy, it was increasingly harder and more expensive to procure the necessary goods for daily life and luxury goods for power projection. Especially bronze, as tin was extremely rare. Slowly, this would push the world into an increased usage of iron, which was initially inferior to established bronzesmithing for weapons but much cheaper. It took a long time before it would catch up and eventually surpass it. The collapse of a system where the trading power was mostly in the hands of the elite opened the way for more free merchants to pursue their craft, and trade would resume, perhaps with increased vigor across the world once more. Some old powers would remain, such as a weakened Egypt and Assyria. New ones would emerge, such as the Philistines, Israelites, the Phoenician city-states, and much more. And the world would go on into a new age. Into another cycle of violence and prosperity, hand in hand, as it always has been and always will. And with this, we come to an end to the first episode about the Sea People in the Bronze Age collapse. Turns out most of them weren't such bad guys at all. They were just looking to survive, and you know what? You'd probably do the same. Assuming the law wouldn't catch you or something. I hope you enjoyed the video, because I know I did, doing all the research and actual new research. It's always a joy reading history. Stuff like this takes a long time to research and produce though, so any shares, likes, comments, or subscribing if you're crazy enough, it really goes a long way and it's definitely appreciated. What's coming next? Well, you're just gonna have to stick around and find out. And until the next time...